My name is Eleanor Reed. Most people used to call me Ellie. That night, though, there wasn't a soul who called me anything. I remember the way the fluorescent lights at the Greyhound terminal flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the stained linoleum floor. I sat on the hard bench near the vending machines, a faded suitcase beside me, and a crumpled $10 bill pressed between my fingers like a lifeline. My coat, too thin for the February chill, barely covered my knees. I was coughing so hard I tasted blood, but when I looked up at Marcus, my son, he couldn't even meet my eyes. "You'll figure it out, Mom," he said, tugging at the collar of his designer coat like it was choking him. "I can't bring this home to the kids." Tasha said, "Look, just don't call. We need space." That's what he said. We need space. Like I was clutter, noise, something to be cleared out. He gave me one last look, then turned and walked toward his car. My old Corolla, actually, the one I had driven for years before he and his wife upgraded me to their spare room. His taillights disappeared into the snow-soaked night, and with them, whatever pieces of my dignity I still had left. I should have cried. That's what people expect in stories like this. But I didn't. I sat there, dazed, throat raw from coughing and heart clamped tight like a locked jewelry box. Maybe I was too sick. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I was just too done. What does it feel like to be abandoned by your only child? It's not the shouting or the cruelty that hurts the most. It's the cold efficiency. The way he packed up my life in a single duffel bag and dropped me off like lost luggage. There was no argument, no tears, just a shrug and a, "You'll be fine." I wasn't fine. I was sick, something deep in my lungs, and dizzy from fever. I hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, not since Tasha started insisting I stay in my room just to be safe. She left food outside the door like I was a stray dog. At first I tried to tell myself she was just being cautious, protecting the kids, but after Marcus started locking the hallway door at night, I knew the truth. They were waiting for the moment I became too much. And I guess I had. The bus station was nearly empty that night. Just a janitor mopping near the entrance, and a teenage girl in the corner crying into her phone. I remember watching the steam curl from the top of a vending machine's cup of coffee, and wondering if I could make it stretch into dinner. I pulled my coat tighter and leaned my head back against the wall, willing the room to stop spinning. I thought of my husband, Clarence. He'd passed 6 years earlier. Heart attack. Sudden, brutal. We were married for 38 years. He would have never let this happen. If he were alive, I wouldn't have been sitting on a hard bench with my life boiled down to a suitcase and $10. But Clarence was gone. So was our home. I'd sold it at Marcus's suggestion to free up some cash and help with their down payment on that big echoing suburban house with the wraparound porch. He'd promised I'd always have a place with them, a warm room, a family. Promises are funny things. They're easy to say, easy to forget, and easy to weaponize. I closed my eyes and tried to picture something, anything that would make me feel human again, not a burden, not a mistake. I thought of the way my grandson Liam used to sneak into my lap when he was 3, how he'd whisper, "Tell me a happy story, Grandma." I used to have so many. Now all I had was the sound of bus engines and the bitter realization that I had nowhere else to go. But sometimes, even in the darkest places, something flickers. I didn't know it then, but that night on the cold metal bench, I was at the edge of something. Not just ruin, but rebirth. Not just despair, but a door creaking open in the distance. I looked down at the $10 bill and held it tight. "This isn't the end," I whispered. My voice cracked with sickness and silence. "It can't be." And somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the pain, beneath the shame, something small and defiant began to burn. It didn't happen all at once. No one wakes up and thinks, "Today is the day I lose my place in the world." It starts with 1,000 tiny concessions, compromises that seem harmless in the moment. A sigh here, a silence there. Then one day you look around and realize you don't belong anywhere. I moved in with Marcus and Tasha 2.5 years ago, right after I sold the house on Leeward Avenue. It was a little blue one-story with a picket fence that Clarence painted himself every other summer. We'd lived there for 31 years. The garden bloomed best in late April, and the kitchen still smelled faintly of lemon oil, and his aftershave even after he was gone. Selling it felt like cutting off a limb, but Marcus made it sound like the most loving option. "Mom, it's too much for you to take care of on your own," he said. "You shouldn't be isolated. You should be with us, with family." Tasha echoed him, her voice syrupy with concern. "You'd have your own space, Ellie. We'll build you a little suite downstairs. The boys would love to have Grandma around all the time." It sounded like a lifeline. I told myself Clarence would have wanted me to take it. I thought, this is what family does. They look after each other. So I signed the papers. I packed my memories into cardboard boxes. I handed my only son the check that held everything Clarence and I had built over 3 decades, a legacy of quiet sacrifice and shared dreams. And in return, I was given a windowless room in the basement. They called it a granny flat. It was a converted laundry room with a cot, a narrow wardrobe, and a leaky utility sink in the corner. It was fine at first, or maybe I just told myself it was. In those early weeks, I did what I always did. I tried to be helpful. I woke before sunrise to make breakfast, packed school lunches, folded the mountain of laundry that came from 2 growing boys, and a husband who apparently couldn't tell whites from colors. Tasha worked part-time at a real estate office, and Marcus's tech startup was scaling, whatever that meant. They were busy, overwhelmed. I understood. I wanted to ease their load. At first they said, "Thank you." Then the gratitude faded, replaced with expectation. My help stopped being generous. It became invisible. One morning, I had a particularly bad flare-up in my knee. Old arthritis. Nothing new, but it had me limping. Tasha caught me wincing as I reached for a pot on the high shelf and sighed, not in concern, annoyance. "Are you going to be okay to get the boys to school?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. I nodded. Of course I would. I always would, because if I said no, what then? What was I, if not useful? Over time, my identity faded into the wallpaper. I wasn't Eleanor anymore. I was the ghost in the kitchen, the unseen hand behind clean clothes and warm meals. They never said it out loud, but I could feel it, that I had overstayed my welcome, that the room was only temporary, that I was supposed to disappear quietly. When I got sick, everything shifted. It started with a cough, just a dry tickle in the chest. Then came the fever, the chills, the breathlessness that crept in slowly, like smoke under a door. I tried to hide it, took over-the-counter meds, made hot lemon water, wore an extra sweater and kept to myself. But even illness is a luxury when you're living in someone else's house. You don't get to be sick, you get to be inconvenient. Tasha started leaving food outside the door. "Just until you're better," she said. "Marcus asked me to stop hugging the kids. You know how sensitive Liam's lungs are, Mom." By the 4th day they locked the door at the top of the basement stairs. I couldn't leave without calling up and asking them to unlock it. It was the beginning of the end. I knew it in my bones. And yet when Marcus came down on that final night with my suitcase already packed and his face set like stone, I was still surprised. "I'm taking you to the bus terminal," he said. "There's a place downtown that helps women. You can try there." My voice cracked before the protest could leave my lips. "But Marcus, where would I go?" He didn't answer. He just pointed at the door. I hadn't even known they'd changed the lock. I looked down at the suitcase. One of the wheels was broken. Clarence had always meant to fix it. I'd kept it anyway, so I picked it up. Because what else could I do? As I walked up the stairs, each step felt heavier than the last. Not because of the suitcase, but because I was leaving behind more than a basement. I was leaving behind the illusion that I still belonged to someone, that I was wanted. That descent didn't start in a bus station. It began the moment I gave away everything I had for the promise of family. And now I had nothing left but a name no one spoke anymore, and $10 in my pocket. Before I continue, I want to ask all of you to please give a like to this video and subscribe to my channel, The Silent Stories, for more stories like mine. Your support means the world to me. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop a comment telling me which country you're tuning in from. It's incredible to see how far this community of wonderful people has grown, and I'm so grateful to be able to share my story with you. The Greyhound terminal on Ashbridge Street doesn't look like much during the day, and it looks even worse at night. A line of flickering street lights throws long, crooked shadows across the wet pavement. A broken vending machine hums like it's trying to sing over the silence. That night, the place smelled like old coffee, damp coats, and something faintly metallic, maybe rust, maybe regret. Marcus dropped me off just after 10. He didn't even come inside. Don't lose the $10, he said, pushing a bill into my hand like it was an inconvenience. Just don't call me tonight, okay? I've got a conference call early. He waited for me to get out before pulling away. I stood there for a moment on the curb, suitcase in hand, watching my own breath cloud the air. When I finally stepped inside, the door let out a groan like even it didn't want to be bothered. There were three people in the station, a man asleep under his coat, a security guard with one AirPod in, and a woman behind the counter who looked like she'd lost interest in carrying around the same time Disco died. I didn't have a ticket. I didn't have a plan. I barely had the strength to stand. I picked the bench furthest from the draft and sat. The suitcase leaned against my shin. The $10 bill was still in my hand, slightly damp from my palm. I folded it into my coat pocket like it might keep me warm. It didn't. My chest was tight. Not from sadness, at least not the kind I knew how to name, but from the pressure of something I couldn't shake. My breath came shallow. I was freezing, but sweat was beading on my forehead. I leaned back and closed my eyes. For a few seconds, I imagined Clarence walking in through the door. He'd have on that old windbreaker he loved, the navy one with the frayed collar. He'd smile at me, hold out his hand, and say, "Ellie, let's go home." But when I opened my eyes, the only thing waiting was a flickering overhead bulb and the quiet whir of the vending machine's cooling fan. I didn't have a home to go back to. The silence in that station was louder than any shouting. It made space for the words I hadn't let myself think before. You gave up your house for them. You gave up your independence, your pride, your safety, and now you're sick, you're alone, and no one is coming for you. I pulled my coat tighter around me. The fever was making it hard to think straight. The lights swam in and out of focus. My teeth chattered, but I couldn't tell if it was from cold or panic or just the raw animal fact that I was utterly terrifyingly alone. After an hour of sitting motionless, the security guard wandered by and looked down at me. "You waiting on a bus, ma'am?" I hesitated. I could barely speak. "No," I rasped. "Just resting." He looked me over. His gaze paused on my flushed face, my shaking hands. There was a flicker of concern in his eyes, the kind people get when they're not sure if they should get involved. "You okay?" he asked, softer this time. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him I was fine, but the words stuck in my throat like gravel. I think I have the flu," I whispered. "Maybe worse." He didn't call an ambulance. He didn't shoo me out, but he didn't offer help either. Just nodded, muttered something about keeping warm and walked off. That was the moment that broke something. Not when Marcus left me. Not when I was locked in a basement like a liability, but there. On a bench beneath buzzing lights and next to a trash can that smelled like reheated failure. That was when the last thread snapped. I couldn't keep pretending that if I was just kind enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, that someone would take care of me. That thread had frayed for years, ever since Clarence died. And now it was gone. I had no map, no instructions, no next step. And that's when I saw it. A flicker of yellow light in the distance through the dirty glass door. A storefront across the street, half lit, almost invisible unless you were desperate enough to be looking for it. A sign hung above the door. "Ruby's Wash and Brew Laundry, Coffee, open late." The name was handwritten in curly red letters, the kind you don't see much anymore. Warm, inviting, human. It looked like a place that had heart. And right then, I needed heart more than anything. I stood up slowly, knees screaming, and gripped the suitcase handle. I walked out into the night, each step on the icy sidewalk, reminding me that I still had legs, I still had choice, I still had breath. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside, the warmth wrapped around me like a blanket. Behind the counter stood a woman with short curls, a red apron, and the kind of eyes that notice things. She looked at me, really looked, and said the three kindest words I'd heard in months. "Sit down, baby. Sit down, baby." That's all she said, but it broke something loose inside me, not in a painful way, but like a jammed door, finally easing open. Her voice was soft and worn, like an old blanket, and it carried none of the suspicion I'd come to expect when walking into places like this with unwashed hair and too many layers on. The woman behind the counter had a presence about her, rooted and warm. She wasn't young, maybe in her late 50s, with silver glinting through her dark curls and skin the color of polished mahogany. Her name tag said Ruby, in cursive ink under a plastic shield, though I would have guessed that even if it hadn't. Some people just fit their names. Go on, she nodded toward the booth, by the window. You look like you need something hot and some air that doesn't smell like pennies. I gave a small nod, words failing me again. My body was screaming for rest, but my instincts were on edge. I had grown used to bracing, against judgment, against rejection, against being asked to leave. So when I slid into the booth, I half expected her to follow with rules or a warning. Instead, she brought me a cup of tea. No charge, no questions, no fuss. It was in one of those heavy ceramic diner mugs, the kind that holds heat like a promise. Steam drifted up in curling spirals, and when I wrapped my fingers around it, I realized how cold I truly was. My hands looked foreign, red and cracked, shaking slightly as I lifted the mug to my lips. Chamomile and a little honey, Ruby said, setting a paper napkin on the table. Ain't no miracle cure, but it helps. I couldn't hold her gaze. Gratitude felt like shame in that moment. I murmured, "Thank you," barely louder than the whisper of steam. Ruby sat across from me without asking, and studied my face for a long moment. Not intrusively, but like someone taking measure of a storm. Her eyes weren't prying, just patient. "You sick?" she asked gently. I nodded. "Fever. It came on 2 days ago, maybe 3. I coughed into my sleeve, the sound raw and rattling. "Got a place to stay tonight?" The question hit me like a gust of cold wind. No softness in it this time, just clarity. I hesitated. Lying seemed foolish. "No," I admitted. "I was at the bus terminal." Ruby clicked her tongue. "Damn shame. A woman your age, sick and out there in this weather." I looked down at my tea. It wasn't my idea. I'm guessing it never is. She didn't press. Instead, she stood, crossed to the back, and came out a minute later with a small blanket and a granola bar. "Here," she said, laying them down like sacred offerings. "Tide's low this week. Not many folks around. I got a cot in the break room, clean sheets, door locks. You need a place to warm up. It's yours." I looked at her then, really looked, and in her expression, I saw no pity, only understanding, recognition, maybe, like she'd stood in a place not too different from mine. "I can't pay you," I said, my voice breaking. Ruby just smiled. "Didn't ask you to, but if you want to wipe down tables tomorrow, or help fold towels, I won't say no." And that was it. No paperwork, no sign-in sheet, no contract, just kindness. I stayed that night, drank the tea, ate the granola bar, crawled onto the narrow cot in the back room, next to a humming dryer and a shelf of lost and found scarves. The cot creaked, and the blanket was scratchy, but I don't think I've ever slept so hard. I slept for 10 hours straight. When I woke, Ruby was already brewing a fresh pot of coffee and slicing bananas for the morning crowd. A few regulars shuffled in and out, carrying laundry baskets and sipping hot drinks. The air smelled like cinnamon and dryer sheets. It felt like being alive again, in a way I hadn't felt for a long time. After the breakfast rush, Ruby came to sit with me again. She handed me a crumpled $2 scratch-off ticket with a wink. "Customer left it behind," she said. "Still good. Maybe you've got better luck." I smiled faintly. My late husband used to say the lottery was a tax on desperation. "Maybe," she shrugged. "But sometimes desperation's all you've got to bet with." I didn't scratch it right away, didn't want the moment to end. But I slipped it into my coat pocket like it mattered. Because in that cafe laundromat hybrid, under soft yellow lights and the distant hum of spin cycles, something shifted. It wasn't just the tea, or the bed, or even Ruby's kindness. It was the first time in a long, long while I felt like someone saw me, not as a burden, not as a responsibility, just as a woman, tired, but still standing, still here. I didn't touch the lottery ticket until the sun had gone down again. All day I'd kept it in my coat pocket, wrapped tight in a tissue like it was too fragile to breathe. Silly, I know, But when everything in your life has fallen apart, even small pieces of possibility feel sacred. After the breakfast rush at Ruby's, I helped wipe down tables and folded towels from the dryer. It wasn't hard work, nothing compared to years of scrubbing floors or cooking dinner for four every night, but something about it felt different. Lighter, like I was doing it for the sake of movement, not to earn permission to exist. Ruby didn't hover. She let me move at my own pace. Every once in a while, she'd toss me a nod or a wink from behind the counter. We didn't speak much, but her silence wasn't cold. It was full of trust, like a soft blanket left at the foot of a bed. You could take it if you needed it or not. After lunch, she passed me a small bowl of soup and a half sandwich on white bread. "Eat," she said. Simple as that. And I did. It was the first real meal I'd had in days, and as I sipped the warm broth, I felt something unfamiliar: safety. No one was watching me. No one was calculating what I owed for it. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to earn it. I could just be. By nightfall, the cafe had emptied out. The buzz of conversation was gone, replaced by the soft clink of coffee cups and the low hum of the overhead fan. Outside, the snow had started again, small flakes dancing under the street lamp. I sat by the window, watching the wind stir little spirals of white along the sidewalk. My body still ached. My breath still came shallow, but the fever had receded to a manageable burn. I felt more like a person and less like a ghost. And that's when I remembered the ticket. I pulled it from my coat pocket slowly, unfolding the napkin around it with care. It was one of those $2 scratch-offs, glossy and garish, with a cartoon leprechaun dancing across a rainbow. Lucky Clover Bonanza. It made me smile, if only because Clarence would have rolled his eyes at the name. I found a penny on the floor near the register and returned to my booth. It felt silly to hope. Ridiculous, even. But sometimes when you've been brought that low, when the world has made it clear it has no space for you, hope becomes an act of rebellion. So I scratched. The silver coating flaked away in soft curls. First number 900. I frowned. That was a high prize number, probably just a tease. I kept scratching. Second box 900. My hand stilled. Third box 900. I sat there for a moment, blinking at the card like it had just spoken. No confetti burst out. No music swelled. Just me and that cheap little card, with 3 matching numbers, quietly sitting under the glow of an aging light fixture. I thought it must be a mistake. I turned the card over, reading the rules twice, then again. Match 3 of the grand prize numbers. Win the grand prize. I had matched 3. I was holding the winning ticket. I don't remember standing, don't remember walking to the counter, just remember Ruby looking up from her register. As I whispered, I think I won." She furrowed her brow, took the card from my trembling hands, and held it up to the light. Then she let out a soft whistle. "Well, I'll be," she muttered. "Ellie, honey, you just hit the jackpot." My mouth went dry. "How much?" She pointed at the bold red lettering near the bottom. "That number you matched, that's not $900. That's 900,000. The floor seemed to tilt under me. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. Ruby caught my elbow instinctively. "Okay, sit. Deep breaths. We don't need anyone passing out on the blessed tile floor." She eased me back into the booth, poured me a glass of water, and knelt beside me. Her voice lowered, careful and kind. "We're not gonna tell a soul. Not yet. You need to keep this quiet. At least for now." "Why?" I asked, barely able to form the words. She leaned in. "Because good fortune draws attention, and attention ain't always friendly. You need a plan before the world gets wind of this." She picked up her phone. "I'm calling my cousin Nate. He's a banker. Real smart. Doesn't ask dumb questions. He'll come by tomorrow and help you figure out how to claim it without everyone sniffing around your business." I nodded numbly. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. But in my chest, something unfurled. A breath I didn't know I'd been holding. A flicker of warmth that had nothing to do with the tea, or the soup, or the blankets. It wasn't joy yet. It was power. quiet and trembling, but real. I looked out the window, past the swirling snow, past the empty sidewalk, and I whispered to myself, this is not the end. It was the beginning. The next morning felt like stepping into someone else's life. Sunlight poured in through the cafe's front windows, casting golden rectangles on the tile floor. The snow had stopped some time before dawn, leaving a soft white hush outside. Inside Ruby's wash and brew, everything looked the same. The plastic plants, the faded open 24 hours sign, the comforting clink of mugs, being stacked but nothing felt the same. I had a winning lottery ticket in my coat pocket, $900,000. I said the number silently, again and again trying to believe it. My mind kept twisting around it like a riddle. Eleanor Reed, who had been sleeping on a cot in a back room less than 48 hours ago, was now a woman with a bank appointment and a future. Ruby's cousin Nate arrived around 10 a.m., dressed in a gray wool coat and wire-rimmed glasses. His handshake was firm, but his voice was gentle. He didn't ask why I looked like I hadn't slept in days, or why I was holding on to a winning scratch-off ticket like it might vanish. He just said, let's make a plan. He guided me through the process, with the kind of care that didn't feel patronizing. Nate helped me file the claim discreetly, explaining each step. We agreed on a one-time lump sum, and after taxes I would receive a wire transfer of $620,000. I opened a new account under my name, just my name. It felt like breathing clean air after years underground. I didn't shout the news from the rooftops. I didn't even tell Ruby how much it was, only that it was enough. She respected that. She always knew when to ask, and when to let people be. Once the money cleared, I did the first truly selfish thing I'd done in years. I rented an apartment. Not just any apartment. A one-bedroom walk-up on the third floor of a brick building near the park. It had light. I mean real light. The kind that spills across the floor, and makes everything feel golden. The windows were large and drafty in a charming way. The bathroom had pink tiles from the 1970s, and a clawfoot tub. There was a fireplace that didn't work but looked beautiful anyway. I signed the lease in pen. My hand shook a little. Eleanor Reed, tenant. I stood in the middle of the empty living room the day I got the keys. Just stood there, no furniture, no rugs, nothing but a keychain in my hand, and a quiet peace in my chest. This is mine, I whispered. Not borrowed space. Not tolerated space. Mine. The next week, I bought clothes that fit. Not clearance rack sweaters 2 sizes too big, but slacks that hugged my waist gently, and blouses in deep plum and rust. I bought leather ankle boots with a zipper that made a satisfying shuck sound when I pulled them on. I walked past a salon with a chalkboard out front. New season, new you. I walked in without thinking. The stylist, Luca, had a pierced eyebrow and warm eyes. He ran his fingers through my overgrown, brittle hair, and smiled, ready to let go of some weight. He asked. I think I already did, I said. An hour later, my shoulder-length gray hair was gone. In its place, a chic jaw-grazing bob with soft layers. When I looked in the mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back. She looked awake. The next stop was a camera store. For years, photography had been a whisper in my heart, something I'd meant to explore once the house was paid off, once the kids were grown, once Clarence retired. But life had a habit of elbowing those dreams aside. Now, I had time. I walked in and told the young clerk behind the counter, I want to learn how to see again. He blinked, then smiled. Let's get you started. I bought a sturdy beginner's camera, nothing flashy, and enrolled in an evening course at the community center. My first night in class, the instructor asked us to introduce ourselves and say why we were there. I said, because I finally can. That was enough. Each day after, I walked through the park near my apartment with my camera slung around my neck. I photographed rusted swings, peeling paint on benches, an elderly couple, holding hands under a red umbrella. I learned to slow down, to look, to frame. It wasn't just about pictures. It was about reclaiming the gaze. For years, I had been unseen, a fixture, a function. Now I was the observer, the artist, the woman behind the lens. My mornings became quiet rituals. A cup of coffee on the windowsill, a walk with my camera, a stop at the library, or the cafe. I started breathing deeper, laughing more, sleeping through the night. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't headline worthy, but it was mine, and it was just the beginning. It started as most beautiful things do without warning. I was sitting in the back row of my Tuesday night photography class trying to understand aperture settings when he leaned over and said, "I think your camera's set to blur the entire universe." I glanced at the man beside me, gray beard, baseball cap, flannel shirt, with sleeves rolled up to the elbows. His name tag read Frank. He was in his early 70s, maybe, with kind eyes and a smile that arrived slowly, like he was testing whether it would be welcome. I looked at my camera fiddled with the dials, then smiled back. Honestly, that might be exactly what I'm trying to do. He chuckled. It wasn't loud, but it had weight to it, like someone who hadn't laughed much lately but missed it. That's how it started. Not with grand declarations or romantic cliches, just two people sitting side by side learning how to see the world again. Frank had been a high school art teacher and woodworker before retiring, a widower for 6 years, lost his wife married to breast cancer, said he hadn't picked up a paintbrush since. Photography was his way of getting back into the light. He was patient, not the kind of man who rushed to fill silences. He let things be. After class, we started getting coffee together at a small cafe down the street, one of those old places with cracked tile floors and mismatched mugs. We'd talk about the class, about our photos, about the odd little beauty we noticed in the world. He showed me a picture he took of a broken fence post surrounded by wildflowers. I showed him one I took of an old woman's hands, wrinkled and folded in her lap like resting birds. "You've got an eye," he said. "No," I told him. "I've got time now. Maybe that's the difference." He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. We never labeled what we were. It didn't matter. There was no courtship, no pretending, just a slow, steady unfolding. He walked me home after class, called to check on me if I missed a session, gave me a book of black and white portraits for my birthday, with a note inside that said, "Your story is worth framing." Sometimes we'd walk through the park together, side by side, cameras around our necks. We didn't always talk. Sometimes we just listened to wind in the trees, to ducks landing in the pond, to the sound of our own quiet company. He never tried to save me. He just saw me. And after so many years of invisibility, that alone felt like a kind of rescue. Meanwhile, Ruby and I grew closer too. She became the sister I never had, the steady heartbeat of my new life. Every week or so, I'd stop by the cafe with a new photo to show her, and she'd put it right on the community bulletin board, right between the flyer for jazz night and a coupon for bulk detergent. "This one here," she'd say, tapping the thumbtacked print with a manicured finger. "This one's got soul." She never let me leave without eating. If I protested, she'd shoo me into a booth and bring me a plate of something warm. "Art needs fuel," she'd say. "You're feeding the world with those eyes of yours. Let me feed the rest." One rainy afternoon, Ruby leaned over the counter and said, "You ever think about showing your work?" I blinked, like in a gallery. "Sure, why not?" I laughed. "Ruby, I'm a 66-year-old woman who just learned how to change a camera lens 2 months ago." She narrowed her eyes. "So what? You're seeing things most people forgot how to notice." "That counts." I shrugged it off at the time, but her words burrowed deep. Later that week, I printed a few of my favorite shots, one of a child chasing pigeons, another of frost on a park bench, and slid them into a folder. I didn't do anything with them. Not yet, but they were ready, waiting, just like I was. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving someone else's life. I was building my own, one image at a time. I found out through a friend of a friend. Word travels fast in a town like ours. There was a short write-up in the local lifestyle column. Local woman wins big on lottery scratch-off. Turns life around with art and grace. They didn't use my full name, just E. Reed. But there were enough clues. The cafe name, The photo of me smiling beside one of my prints, the mention of a downtown gallery opening. It took exactly 3 days. 3 days for the past to come knocking. I was making tea in my apartment when the phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. My gut knew before I even answered. Mom? The voice hit me like a wind chime caught in a storm. Hesitant, carefully measured, but unmistakably Marcus. I didn't say anything at first, just let the silence stretch. He filled it, of course. He always did. I saw something in the paper. Is it true? You won the lottery? So there it was. No pretense, no pleasantries. Straight to the headline. Yes, I said. Calm, flat, no invitation in my tone. I mean, wow, that's incredible. Really, I'm so happy for you. We were just talking about you, actually. The kids miss you. Liam was saying the other night he hasn't had your meatloaf in ages. Meatloaf, like that was the thread holding us together. I didn't respond. He coughed awkwardly, then shifted gears. Listen, I know things got kind of messy that night. Tasha and I, we weren't thinking straight. It was a bad time. Stress, the pandemic stuff, work. We didn't handle it right. I let him talk. Let the guilt-tinged apology unspool. Because I'd heard it before, not in words but in tone, in the way people try to rewrite history the moment the balance of power shifts. Eventually he circled to his point. Anyway, maybe we could meet, just talk, maybe get dinner. Or actually, are you still connected with that place, Ruby's? Of course he remembered Ruby's. That's where he left me behind. We could meet there, he added quickly, neutral ground. I didn't answer right away. I thought about saying no, about ending it then and there, but something in me said it wasn't over yet. Not properly, not until I stood in front of the boy I raised, and showed him the woman he no longer recognized. Tomorrow, I said. 3 o'clock. Ruby's. The next day I arrived early. I wore a slate blue cardigan, simple earrings, a swipe of berry lipstick, not to impress him, but for me, for the woman who had clawed her way back to herself. Ruby gave me a look, as I settled into the booth. You good? She asked, her eyes serious. I nodded. More than good. When the bell above the door chimed, I saw them Marcus, in a fitted blazer that looked too tight around the shoulders. Tasha, behind him, visibly thinner than I remembered, and the kids, Liam and Noah, trailing behind them, all nervous smiles and shuffling feet. Marcus scanned the room. When his eyes landed on me, there was a beat of pure confusion, like he wasn't sure it was me. My posture, my hair, my calm. Mom, he said finally, sliding into the seat across from me. You look, wow. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I look like myself. The small talk was clumsy. The kids fidgeted. Tasha ordered a latte she barely touched. And then, just as I expected, the conversation shifted. I know this might be awkward. Marcus began, fingers laced tight on the table. But we could really use your help. Things have been hard. The business, it's not good. We're behind on the mortgage. There it was. He didn't even pretend this time. We made a mistake. Tasha added softly. That night, it wasn't our finest hour. But we're still family, right? I looked at the children. Liam stared at his shoes. Noah toyed with a sugar packet. Then I looked at my son, and for the first time, I didn't see him as my lifeline, or my responsibility. I saw a man who had chosen comfort over kindness, and who now saw me not as a mother, but as a solution. You left me at a bus station with $10. I said, my voice low, even. His face paled. I was sick, Marcus. You knew that. I know I do. And I regret it every day. I'm not here for an apology, I said, my tone firm. I'm here so you can see what survival looks like. Silence. Then he tried again. Can't we just move on? We already have, I replied. Just not together. I placed two $10 bills on the table. For the boys' drinks. Tell them they can call me when they're old enough to understand choice. I stood, nodded once, and walked out. Ruby didn't say a word. She just opened the door, and held it as I stepped into the sunlight. Outside, the breeze lifted the edge of my scarf, and for the first time in decades, I realized I was no longer waiting for anyone to love me right. I had learned to love myself well, and there was no going back. Peace, I discovered, doesn't arrive all at once. It comes slowly like sunlight filtering through lace curtains, a quiet accumulation of mornings without dread, meals eaten without guilt, and laughter that bubbles up without warning. After that final meeting with Marcus, I thought I might feel regret. That old voice in my head, the mother in me, warned I'd made a terrible mistake, that I'd lost something I couldn't afford to lose, but it never came. What came instead was silence, clean, uninterrupted silence. And in that silence, I found room to build. It started with a little idea, a seed planted during one of my walks through the park, camera slung across my chest. I passed a group of women gathered on a picnic bench, gray-haired and full of conversation. Their laughter echoed through the trees, bright and unfiltered. They were vibrant, present. And yet I knew that most of the world would walk past them without a second glance. I couldn't stop thinking about them. That night, over a cup of tea, I pulled out my notebook and began sketching something. An outline of a space, a studio, a sanctuary. I would call it Second Bloom, a photography and creative space just for women over 60, a place where we could learn, create, and most of all be seen. With Ruby's help and a whole lot of paperwork, I found a small storefront on a quiet side street near the art supply store. The rent was manageable. The landlord, an older woman with a paint-splattered apron, gave me a discount when I told her the idea. She said, "We need more places like this." I nodded. We did. The day we opened, I cried. It wasn't fancy, just white walls, folding chairs, a few donated easels, and one working kettle. But when the first group of women walked in, eyes bright and nervous, I knew I had built something real. Each week we held workshops. Some brought their knitting, others wrote poetry. Most had never picked up a camera in their lives. But they came. They came with stories, with grief, with wonder. They came like I did, unsure, but hoping. And as they created, I photographed them. Hands adjusting a lens, eyes squinting in concentration, faces lit by the glow of rediscovered purpose. I framed those moments, hung them on the walls, celebrated them. It became more than a studio. It became a mirror. And the reflections, they were beautiful. Frank helped me with the shelves, the lighting, the little repairs. He brought fresh bread on Wednesdays and stayed late to help sweep up. We never called it anything, but there was love in the way he always waited for me to lock up together, then walked me home under the street lamps. On weekends we'd drive out to the lake. He taught me how to fish. I taught him how to frame a shot of a dragonfly landing on a cattail. Daisy, my golden retriever, rode in the back seat, her nose pressed to the window. My home, my little apartment above the bookstore, was filled with life, light, photographs in mismatched frames, postcards from women who'd moved away but still sent updates. I sold my first painting, or I bought a camera just like yours. Sometimes I'd get letters from strangers, women who had heard my story, seen my gallery show, or watched a small clip of me on the local news. They wrote things like, "I thought I was too old to start again," or "You reminded me that my voice matters." Every single one I saved in a wooden box by the window. My life, once confined to a single suitcase, now spilled joyfully across walls, shelves, and hearts. But not all stories tied up neatly. I never heard from Marcus again. Part of me ached for the grandsons I'd helped raise, their birthdays, their graduations, but another part of me knew that trying to go back would be like stepping into a house that no longer had a door. I had left that life behind, not in bitterness, but in clarity. Sometimes peace is knowing what not to chase. And so I stayed still, rooted. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a beginner's class on light and shadow, Ruby walked in with a bouquet of wildflowers and a smile that reached all the way to her earrings. "You got 5 minutes?" she asked. "For you?" I grinned. "Always." She pushed the flowers toward me. "No reason. Just, you've been blooming, Ellie." And I wanted to say, "I see it. We all do." I looked down at the blooms. Yellow, violet, white, wild and unarranged. Like me, like this life. Unplanned, imperfect, and growing in every direction. They say some flowers only bloom at night, others wait until the late season, quiet, patient, persistent. I used to think I had missed my time, that by the age of 66, all my chances had already come and gone. I couldn't have been more wrong. It started with a nudge from Mrs. Gable, the instructor from my community photography class. She was in her early 70s, with eyes like hawks, and a wardrobe that looked like it had traveled through every decade, and picked the best from each. She'd been watching my work. One evening after class, she pulled me aside and said, "Eleanor, have you ever thought about submitting to the Miller Street Gallery? They're doing a juried exhibit on the overlooked lens. Your portraits belong there." I laughed at first, nervously. "I just started a few months ago," I told her. And yet she said, handing me a flyer, "You see like someone who's been waiting a lifetime to look." That line stuck with me. The next day I gathered the courage to print and mount 6 of my best photos. A shot of a wrinkled hand clasping a paper coffee cup, a child's rain boot in a puddle of light, a street vendor's cart lit by golden dusk. Small things, quiet things, but real. I dropped off my portfolio and told myself not to expect anything. Hope, I'd learned, is a gentle creature. You don't cage it, but you don't chase it either. 2 weeks later, I got the call. "Miss Reed, we'd be honored to feature your work in our exhibit." I stood in my apartment, holding the phone to my chest, too stunned to speak. When I finally told Ruby, she shouted so loudly over the cafe phone that half her customers clapped along without knowing why. Frank just smiled and kissed my hand. The gallery night came in late spring. I wore a deep plum blouse and a silver scarf. My hair had grown just enough to curl at the ends. My hands trembled as I entered the space, but my feet, they felt solid. The walls were clean white, each piece lit by soft, focused lights. And there, in the center of the left wall, were my photographs. My name in neat print underneath. Eleanor Reed. The Quiet Light Collection. People stood in front of them. Not just stood, paused, leaned in, tilted their heads, and really looked. A woman traced her fingers in the air, near a photo of a park bench covered in frost. "This one," she whispered to her husband. "It feels like the last day I saw my mother." Another couple bought the shot of 2 older women playing dominoes under a tree. They said it reminded them of their aunts back in Havana. One by one my stories were claimed by strangers. Not stolen, adopted. I stood back, hidden in the corner, tears threatening to fall, not because I was proud, not because I had made it, but because I was finally visible. Not as a role, not as someone's mother, someone's burden, someone's mistake, but as a woman who saw things, and who had the courage to show what she saw. Later, as the crowd thinned, Sylvia, the gallery curator, approached me. "We're planning a solo show in the fall," she said. "We'd love to feature more of your work." I nodded, not trusting my voice. That night, Frank walked me home under the stars. Daisy trotted ahead, her tail wagging, as if she knew this moment mattered. When we reached my building, Frank stopped at the bottom step and looked at me with a softness that cracked me open. "You know," he said, voice quiet as the night air, "you've bloomed." I laughed gently. "Bit late, don't you think?" He shook his head. "Some of the most beautiful flowers in the garden bloom the latest." I didn't have an answer for that, just a full heart, and the warmth of his hand in mine. Because in that moment, I realized something simple and powerful. My life hadn't passed me by. It had been waiting for me, and I had finally arrived. I turned 67 on a quiet Thursday in July. The forecast called for sun, and for once the sky cooperated. No last-minute drizzle, no moody clouds, just a wide stretch of blue and a breeze that smelled faintly of lilacs and clean laundry. I had planned to spend the day alone, maybe take my camera out to the lake, make myself something sweet, and read a little. Peace had become my favorite kind of celebration, but Ruby had other plans. She lured me over to her cafe with a suspiciously casual, "I've got a new pie recipe that needs your opinion." I should have known better. When I opened the door, the smell of cinnamon and vanilla hit me like a memory. Then came the sound, laughter, clapping, the unmistakable off-key notes of "Happy Birthday." I froze. My little family, the one I'd built with no blueprint, no bloodlines, was waiting inside. Frank stood near the counter wearing a button-up shirt that he never usually bothered with, holding a bouquet of daisies that looked freshly picked. Ruby stood proudly beside a cake topped with real whipped cream and sugared blueberries. The women from Second Bloom were gathered around a table, each one beaming, their hands already reaching to pull me in. There were photos taped to the walls, prints of my work from the gallery, snapshots from classes, candid shots of Daisy chasing her tail in the studio garden. And right in the center, a photo of me, laughing, eyes crinkled, head thrown back. I didn't recognize the woman at first. She looked free. I brought my hands to my face as the tears came, but this time they weren't from sorrow. They were from wonder. I had never had a surprise party before, not even as a child. I didn't know how deeply I'd needed it. They fed me cake, made me wear a paper crown, and gifted me small things that meant the world. A hand-knitted camera strap, a framed quote that read, "You did not miss your time." A delicate leather-bound notebook with a single embossed word on the cover. Bloom, toward the end of the afternoon, as the crowd thinned and the sugar high faded into contented fatigue, Frank asked me to step outside with him. We sat on the bench just outside the cafe, under the striped awning, where the late light fell gently on the sidewalk. He cleared his throat. I looked at him and smiled. "You don't have to say anything, you know." "I know," he replied. "But I want to." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet pouch, not a box, just a soft pouch, worn at the edges. "I never thought I'd do this again," he began, "and I don't need an answer right now, or even ever if it doesn't feel right. But Ellie," he opened the pouch. Inside was a silver ring, simple and beautiful. A small etching ran along the band, tiny waves, like the ones we watched at the lake. "I want to walk the rest of this road with you," he said. "Not to fix you, not to own you, just to be with you, as you are." I stared at the ring for a long moment, then at him, then back at the life I could suddenly see stretching before me, not as a detour, not as a second act, but as the main story finally beginning. "You know," I said, voice steady but soft, "for most of my life I didn't get to choose who I belonged to. I was given roles: daughter, wife, mother, helper." He nodded, listening. "But this is mine to choose." "And Frank," I smiled, full and wide, "I choose you." The smile that spread across his face could have lit up the entire street. We didn't tell anyone right away, not out of secrecy, but because the sweetness of the moment felt like something we wanted to carry quietly for a while, like a warm stone in a pocket, a promise whispered, not shouted. That night, after everyone had gone home and the candles had melted down to puddles, I stood in my apartment, holding the bouquet of daisies in both hands. They were a little wild, unevenly arranged, with stems too long and some petals already wilting. They were perfect, just like this life, unexpected, messy, and deeply, unshakably mine. If you'd told me 2 years ago that I'd be sitting in a sunlit kitchen, a camera on my table, a dog asleep at my feet, and a silver ring on my finger from a man who looks at me like I invented the moon, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't dream of it, but because I'd stopped believing I was allowed to. Back then I measured my worth in usefulness, in chores completed, in meals cooked, in silence maintained. I thought love meant shrinking, meant staying out of the way, meant giving everything, even when there was nothing left. I was wrong. Love, real love, doesn't erase you. It sees you. It pulls up a chair and says, "Tell me who you are when no one's watching." It asks for your stories, not your labor. It respects your boundaries. It rejoices in your joy, even when it has nothing to gain from it. That's what I found. Not in one moment, but over hundreds of quiet ones. In Ruby's tea, in Frank's steady hand, in the soft click of my camera shutter when the light hit just right, in the laughter of women who once believed their best years were behind them. I used to think my life ended the night Marcus left me at that bus station. I see now, it was the beginning. The moment I stopped asking for permission to be seen, to be heard, to exist on my own terms. And I've come to understand something I wish I could whisper to every woman still sitting in silence, waiting for someone to notice. You do not need to be needed in order to be worthy. You are allowed to take up space, to bloom, to start over at 60, or 70, or 90. It is never too late to find yourself. And if you're still reading or watching or listening, I want you to know I see you. Maybe you're in a season of rebuilding. Maybe you're where I was, lost, tired, told you're too much or not enough. Maybe you've got a dream you've stuffed into the back of a drawer because no one ever asked to see it. I'm asking, tell me your story. Here, in this quiet little community we're building together on this channel, in this corner of the world, we're making space for voices like yours. For messy, beautiful, unfinished stories. For joy that arrives late but rings just as true. So, if you're watching this on a TV, grab your phone. If you're listening on your commute, pause when you can and write to me. Tell me about a time you felt invisible. Tell me about a dream you're dusting off. Tell me about the first small step you took toward your own freedom, even if it was just waking up and whispering, not today, because those stories, they matter. You matter. Your voice, however shaky, however quiet, is a lantern. And somewhere, someone is waiting for your light to reach them, just like I was. So thank you for sitting with me, for listening, for seeing me. Now if you're ready, I'd love to see you too.